Hey guys, welcome to class today. Today I decided I wanted to try something different, so what we're going to do is I'm going to give you a video of our lecture notes today, so that way I can walk around and help you throughout class, and you can focus and rewind and learn at your own pace, okay? We're going to see how well this works today, and if it works well we can continue to do things like this sometimes in the future, so that way you can all work at your own pace. So today we're going to cover the rulers of Egypt. It's an A-Day. It's 12/9/2015. Our objective and essential question today are that students will learn more about the history of the rulers of ancient Egypt, and students will discover the accomplishment of the three kingdoms. Our essential question for today is, how did Egypt develop under the three different kingdoms? Your warm-up, which you should have already done, is to define the word dynasty, define the word region, and then to hypothesize. Why do you think the pharaohs in ancient Egypt were so powerful? Since you've already done your warm-up, here's a quick review once again of the definitions of the two words we just discussed. A dynasty is a series of rulers from the same family or ethnic group, and a regent is someone who rules for a child until the child is old enough to rule. An example of a dynasty today would be the Windsor dynasty. They are the people who are in charge of England. They're not actually in charge anymore, but for the last couple of hundred of years, the kings and queens of England have been Windsors. That means everyone who's been a king or queen of England has been from the same family. Now, a regent is someone they put in charge if the prince or princess, who is supposed to become king or queen, is too young to become king or queen and couldn't make any decisions. So they put in someone called a regent to make those decisions until the child grows up. All the while, training the child to learn more about ruling, to learn more about science, to learn about all sorts of stuff so they'll make a good leader. Make sense? Okay, today we're going to cover Egyptian kingship, which we're going to talk about dynasties, the unification of Egypt, how powerful pharaohs are. We're going to talk about the three kingdoms, the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, the New Kingdom. Then finally, we're going to talk about rule during the New Kingdom. The pharaoh queen, named Hatshepsut, Thutmose III, and then we're going to talk about after the New Kingdom, including Cleopatra. Egyptian kingship. So, from dynasty to dynasty, Egypt had around 31 dynasties from about 3100 BC until it was conquered in 332 BCE. That's around, I don't know, what is that, 2,700 years of dynasties? So around every 100 years they had one dynasty that would go on. Egypt's dynasties are grouped into three time periods called the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, and the New Kingdom. In between these major kingdoms were times of troubles, wars, invasions, and were weak pharaohs. These were rare, however, because most of ancient Egypt had a stable period of rule. So there were three major periods, like I just said: the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, and the New Kingdom. Those were periods where pharaohs were actually able to hold on to power and able to get people to do what they wanted. When pharaohs weren't able to hold on to power anymore, whether because they were invaded or because someone else attacked them, those periods were called in between the dynasties. And those led to wars or problems, and those only happened for a little bit, as you'll see in the next slide. So here's a timeline of the major time periods in ancient Egypt. As you see on the far left, it says circa 3100 BCE. Egypt is unified. So Egypt is unified around 3100 BCE. That's 5,000 years ago. As we read earlier, as we're about to learn, a man named Menes becomes the first pharaoh and unifies Egypt. It takes around 500 years, though, in order for the rulers in Egypt to make things stable. That means it takes around 500 years for them to get everything under control. So the Old Kingdom is the first time when the rulers of Egypt are actually able to make a long-term kingdom or long-term set of dynasties that last. The Old Kingdom lasts from 2686 BCE to 2125 BCE. And the Old Kingdom has a couple of great accomplishments. One of them being that they build the Great Pyramids at Giza, or Giza, if you say it that way. They finish the Great Sphinx statue, which you're all familiar with. It's that giant cat in the middle of the desert. The Middle Kingdom is much shorter than the Old Kingdom. It only lasts from around 2055 BC to 1650 BC. That's around 400 years. The Middle Kingdom, not that great. Egypt expands some territory, they add some art, they write a lot more, but they don't really do that much. Finally, in the New Kingdom, which is from 1550 BCE to 1069 BCE, a couple of things happen. First, King or Queen Hatshepsut rules. Queen Hatshepsut is the first female pharaoh. She's ruling as regent for her son, or her stepson, but she actually manages to accomplish a lot. Meanwhile, as soon as she dies, her stepson, Thutmose, actually comes into power, and he decides that he thinks Egypt should be a lot bigger. So, under him, Egypt expands greatly, and they actually go all the way into Syria. I'm not sure if you remember where all of that is, but if you're having trouble, you can look up a map. Alright, so to start things off, Egypt is unified. Egypt's first dynasty began when a king named Menes united Upper and Lower Egypt. And if we look back to this past slide, that happens around 3100 BCE, so 5,000 years ago. So Menes unites Upper and Lower Egypt, and in doing so he builds a capital city named Memphis near what we today call Cairo. After he began to rule, and after he unified Upper and Lower Egypt, the ancient civilization of Egypt actually began, and it's considered today to be one of the most stable civilizations in history. That means long-lasting, people really knew who they were, and they had a sense of culture together. Here's a picture of a carving of Menes's head. Since it was 5,000 years ago, there isn't that much statues or that much writing around Menes, but here's one example of it. Actually, I think this might be like the only one. Okay. All-powerful pharaohs. So, as we already know, pharaohs had absolute power or complete control over people. Absolute power is when you can pretty much do whatever you want and no one's going to stop you. But, as you know, that didn't mean that the pharaohs were great. Like, they didn't know everything. So to help in making their decisions, they could turn to their advisors or to Maat, who is the goddess of truth. If they prayed to Maat, they could ask for help in deciding when to go to war, when they should, issue certain laws, if they should collect taxes, all sorts of things of that. But ultimately, it was up to the pharaoh to decide law. He could ask for all the help he wanted, and people could offer him all the advice they wanted, but it was the pharaoh who made the decisions in the end. So, whatever he decided is what ended up being the law. He decided things that were important, like going to war. He decided things that were seemingly less important, like planting the crops and harvesting them. But those are important as well. How else would the people get their food? Here's a painting of Maat, and like I just said, Maat is the goddess who helped pharaohs make the decisions. She was the goddess of truth. Hopefully you're still paying attention at this point. So if you are paying attention at this point, what I would like you to do is draw a star next to the section you are currently in. Okay? So, now you're at the section of your notes where I'm asking you to help explain this quotation. So I'm going to read you the quotation and give you my thoughts on it. And then I want you to think about it and give your own thoughts, alright? So, God Kings. This is a quote by an ancient Egyptian government official about pharaohs. So, he is the god Ra, whose beams enable us to see. He gives more light in the two lands than the sun's disk. He makes earth more green than the Nile and the flood. He has filled the two lands with strength and life. So we haven't really talked about this yet, but the two lands refer to Egypt. You know how I said Upper and Lower Egypt earlier? Back in the day, Upper and Lower Egypt were the way that the people referred to them. So when they were writing, they would call them the two lands. This official is trying to say that the Pharaoh is so powerful that he is the one letting the people see, that he is giving so much more light that it's even more powerful than the sun, that he's so great that he's making the earth more green than the Nile River did when it would flood, and that he's also filling the lands with strength and life. So go ahead, take a second, answer the question here in your notes, and then let's move on. You can pause while you're writing. I would suggest you do that. So press pause if you need to. Okay. Now we move on to the three kingdoms. The three kingdoms of ancient Egypt are the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, and the New Kingdom. As you might imagine, the Old Kingdom is the one that happened the most far away in time, and the Middle Kingdom happened in between, and the New Kingdom happened most recently. Makes sense, right? Okay. The pharaohs of ancient Egypt in the Old Kingdom kept peace and traded with Nubia. Nubia is a kingdom all the way to the south of the Nile River. Eventually, Nubia becomes part of Egypt, but not for a while. They also sent merchants to the eastern coast of the Mediterranean Sea to help find timber. Timber is another word for wood. You probably knew that already. They used this for building. Timber was used to make houses, boats, and furniture. Towards the end of the Old Kingdom, governors in the provinces began to challenge the power of the pharaoh's government, and Egypt's unity crumbled and the dynasties grew weak. So as time went on, the governors of the states or the smaller areas in Egypt began to not believe in what the pharaoh was doing. So they would refuse to do what he said, they would disobey him, and what this meant is that eventually no one was listening to the pharaoh. So his government fell apart. Here is one of the greater achievements of the Old Kingdom, the Sphinx. As you know from previously, the Sphinx and the Great Pyramids were started and completed in the Old Kingdom. And they're still around. That means they're over 4,000 years old. That's so cool. Okay, now we have the Middle Kingdom. The first rulers of the Middle Kingdom restored order after the governors had rebelled, and they reunited the country. In the Middle Kingdom, pharaohs spent most of their money on public works, like pyramids, temples, and farms, instead of war. Because they were focusing on making Egypt better, instead of focusing on making Egypt bigger, this made Egypt grow even richer. Over time, Egypt got weaker and weaker as worse rulers came to power. In time, they lost control of the country to foreign invaders. Womp womp. This is why the Middle Kingdom, even though they were kind of cool, ended up having the shortest amount of time in power. Then we have the New Kingdom. The New Kingdom began in 1567 when Egyptian princes throughout Egypt came together and forced out the foreign invaders. The pharaohs of the New Kingdom decided that they wanted to build an empire, so they created huge armies of soldiers, mounted warriors, and charioteers. Mounted warriors are people on horses, right? Charioteers are people riding in like a cart that's pulled by horses. They also used bronze. Bronze is a mix of copper and tin, which is one of the stronger materials they could make back in the day. They used bronze to make their armor and their weapons, and this made them almost unbeatable in battle. So here we have a picture of a chariot, and you can see that the man is wearing bronze armor, and he has bronze bows and arrows. So things like this, combined with inventions like the chariot, made ancient Egyptians very hard to beat. This says this allowed them to equally conquer their forces, but I meant easily conquer their forces. My apologies. Okay. Now we have the New Kingdom. During the New Kingdom, we have the Pharaoh Queen, Thutmose III, and then ancient Egypt after the New Kingdom, including Cleopatra. Okay, the Pharaoh Queen. In 1504, a child named Thutmose III began his reign. But because he was so young, he was only a couple of years old, his stepmother, Hatshepsut, was appointed regent. We already remember what regent is earlier, right? Regent is someone who is put in charge while waiting for the actual king or queen to grow up because they're so young. His stepmother, Hatshepsut, eventually proclaimed herself pharaoh and ruled for 15 years all on her own. This was unusual because in Hatshepsut's time, there were no female pharaohs. In fact, she was the first. So Hatshepsut rules from 1503 to 1482 BCE, and her reign was very, very good for Egypt. Reign is another word for rule, in case you didn't know. She was a bold leader who created a time of great peace and economic success for her country. She encouraged trade with faraway places and brought ivory, leopard skins, and other things into the empire. However, when Thutmose grew up, Hatshepsut refused to turn over the throne, and after her death, Thutmose destroyed all the statues and images of her throughout the kingdom. Some people think that Thutmose poisoned Hatshepsut so that way he could come to power without having her fight him. I think that since he went around destroying statues of her and trying to make people forget her, that this could have been the case. So here's a picture of Hatshepsut as a mummy. There are a bunch of pictures of her, drawings and carvings, but there aren't as many as there should be. Why? Because Thutmose had them destroyed. But thankfully for Egypt, over the 54 years of Thutmose's rule, he was one of the greatest pharaohs of the New Kingdom. He led wars all the way from Syria to Phoenicia, which is now called Lebanon. He was well educated, since he spent all those times waiting for his stepmother to let him be in charge, and he treated those who he conquered with mercy, which was very unusual for the time. Usually, back in the day, when people conquered a new kingdom, they just kind of killed and took whatever they wanted. Thutmose was a new kind of pharaoh. And here we have a picture of Thutmose. He kind of looks kind of happy, right? Maybe a nice guy? I don't know. Maybe he killed his stepmom. Who could say? After Thutmose, we have the New Egypt after the New Kingdom. And towards the end of the New Kingdom, Egypt began to decline. Civil war had left ancient Egypt weak and poorly defended against outsiders. In 332 BCE, after the end of the New Kingdom, Alexander the Great conquered Egypt. Alexander the Great, as you may know, was an amazing warrior and general from Macedonia, which is just a little bit to the north of Greece. So Alexander the Great of Macedon went around conquering most of the world, and he decided, why not Egypt? That ended the New Kingdom. Here's a picture of Alexander the Great conquering Egypt. He's that guy right there in the middle on the horse, and here he is in front of a picture of the Sphinx. And all those people around him are soldiers who are victorious after defeating the Egyptians. So, after Alexander the Great conquers Europe, he puts his own people in power, the Macedonians. The Macedonians are in power in Egypt, but they also kind of blend with the Egyptians. They decide that they want to fit in by adopting local customs, local ideas. So, the last Macedonian to be in charge is Cleopatra. In 51 BC, Queen Cleopatra becomes the last Macedonian to rule Egypt. She shared the throne with her brother until Egypt was ready, or until Egypt was conquered by Rome. After a power change in Rome, Cleopatra was worried that they would parade her through Egypt to celebrate her victory. To avoid this humiliation, she committed suicide by having a poisonous snake bite her. She was so worried that the Romans were going to try to make her feel bad about who she was and about having lost her position that she actually had to kill herself. Here's Cleopatra with a Roman. I'm not sure if it's Mark Antony or Julius Caesar, but Cleopatra had a history of trying to make the Egyptian or make the Roman rulers love her so that way she could stay in power. And it worked until eventually all of her lovers died. But I guess that happens sometimes. Finally, the unfortunate truth is after Cleopatra, Egypt would not be able to govern itself for another 2,000 years. And even today, Egypt is still having problems with government because they keep accidentally getting into situations where dictators won't let them govern themselves. All right, I hope you finished the notes. I will have an exit activity and another follow-on activity for you. And if you need to go back, you should just go back wherever you need to. All right,